Hi, my name's Janelle and welcome back to Rosery Apparel. In this video, I'm very excited to be sharing a step-by-step tutorial on how to make my Pansy pattern, which is now available to purchase on my website. So first up, a little bit about the Pansy dress. The Pansy dress is what I like to call my perfect everyday dress. It's a super comfortable gathered dress that has a relaxed oversized fit, and it also has a really nice keyhole detail at the back, which makes it so easy to take on and off as there's no zip needed, so you can just simply pop it on over your head and not need someone to zip you up. And the pattern comes with 2 length options and 2 sleeve options as well, so all up you're able to make 4 different dresses from the one pattern. The Pansy pattern is now available to purchase from roseryapparel.com in either physical paper form for $45 or digital form for $25. So the good news is you can download the pattern, print it, and start sewing along with me right away. So follow the link in the description below this video, purchase your copy of the pattern, and let's make this dress together. So once you've purchased the Pansy pattern, you will then need to cut it out in your size. I'll have a link to the size guide in the description of this video that will help you figure out which size is best for you. You will then need to cut out all of the template pieces in your fabric of choice. You can ultimately use any fabric for your Pansy dress, but I personally love using linen and cotton fabrics for mine. I'll also have a link to this amazing gingham Merchant & Mills fabric in the description below if you're interested in picking some up for yourself. To make the Pansy dress, you're also going to need some bias binding. You can either purchase some matching bias binding from your local craft store, or you can instead make your own out of the same fabric as your dress. Let me show you how. Firstly, you'll need a bias binding maker. Again, you can easily pick these up at your local craft store, but I'll also have a link to the one I'm using in the description below. Take a piece of your leftover fabric and fold it in half along the bias. Then measure and cut a strip of fabric as per your bias binding maker instructions. Mine requires a 36mm wide strip of fabric. Depending on the amount of binding you need, you may need to cut multiple strips and stitch them together. Cutting fabric along the bias gives the fabric a little bit of a slight stretch like this. To stitch multiple strips together, place 2 together with right sides together and stitch along the angled edge like this. Then once unfolded, the strips should be joined nicely together like this. Next, take your bias binding maker and feed your long strip of fabric through it. Use a seam ripper if you need to help guide the fabric through. As you feed the fabric through, the bias binding maker folds the raw edges of the fabric in, and as it does so, press the folded edges in place with your iron. And it's as simple as that. You now have some bias binding that is made out of some matching fabric and ready to be used for your Pansy dress. Once you've got your bias binding and the pieces cut out of your fabric, the last thing you'll need is some 25mm or 1-inch wide elastic. Now let's get started on making the Pansy dress. Start by taking the bodice front template piece and use a water erasable pen or some tailor's chalk to mark the 3 points of each dart onto the back of the cut fabric piece. Pin each dart in place by matching the 2 bottom markings together and fold until the top point of the dart. Then stitch the dart starting from the top point and without backstitching to the bottom of the dart to create a kind of triangle shape. Once the darts are sewn, tie the loose threads at the top point of the darts with a double knot. Then press the darts flat, making sure to press them towards the centre of the bodice. And your front bodice piece should now look like this. Next, take the back bodice piece and the bias binding we made earlier and fold and press the binding in half. Then unfold the pressed bias binding and with the right sides together, line up the edge of the binding to the edge of the keyhole detail on the back bodice. Pin in place into the first folded crease line of the bias binding. Once pinned in place, stitch into the same folded crease line like this. Because of the stretch from being cut on the bias binding should be able to curve around the keyhole detail nicely. Once stitched in place, fold the bias binding in half to enclose all of the raw edges onto the inside. Pin and stitch the folded binding in place, making sure to catch the other side of the binding as you sew. And once stitched in place, the keyhole edge should be nicely finished like this. Next, with right sides together, place the bodice front onto the bodice back and stitch them together along the shoulder seams like this. I personally like to overlock all of the raw edges of the seams once I've sewn them to prevent them from fraying. You can do the same, or if you don't own an overlocker, you can use the zigzag stitch of your sewing machine instead. Next, take the remaining length of bias binding and fold it in half to find the centre. Then again, unfold the bias binding, and this time with right sides together, line up the edge of the binding to the neck edge. Then pin and stitch the binding in place, again stitching into the first folded crease line of the bias binding. Then fold the bias binding in half to enclose the raw edges of the neck edge, leaving a 43cm or 17-inch length of bias binding at both sides of the keyhole detail. These will make up the ties for the keyhole. Fold the ends of the bias binding in by about 1cm or half an inch. And snip the corners slightly to remove some of the bulk of the folded fabric. Then stitch the bias binding in place, stitching the folded edges of the bias binding tie at the same time. And the neck edge and keyhole detail of the bodice is complete. Next, take the sleeves and stitch 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top edge in between the notches like this. To sew a gathering stitch, set your sewing machine stitch length to the longest possible setting. Then gently pull on the top 2 threads of the gathering stitches to gather up the top of the sleeve until it's approximately the same size as the armhole edge of the bodice. Then with right sides together, pin and stitch the top of the sleeve to the armhole edge of the bodice like this. Once stitched in place, remove any exposed gathering stitches and then press the gathers with your iron. And your bodice should be looking a little something like this. Next, take the 4 pocket pieces and overlock or zigzag stitch the curved raw edges. Then take the skirt front and back pieces, and with right sides together, pin the pockets to the sides of the skirts, matching the notches together. If you accidentally forgot to cut out the notches, then place them approximately 15cm or 6 inches from the top edge of the skirt. Stitch the pockets in place, and then overlock or zigzag stitch the sides of the skirt pieces. Next, sew 2 rows of gathering stitches along the top edge of both the skirt front and back pieces like this. Then gently gather up the top edges of the skirts until they're approximately the same size as the bodice front and back. With right sides together, pin and stitch the skirt front to the bodice front and the skirt back to the bodice back. Once stitched in place, remove any exposed gathering stitches with a seam ripper, and then give the gathers a good press with your iron. Next, with right sides together, pin the dress front to the dress back along the sides, matching the underarm and skirt seams together. Stitch along the sides, remembering to stitch around the pocket edges like this. Next, fold the raw edges of the sleeves in by about 1 centimeter or half an inch, and then fold the edge in again by about 3 centimeters or 1 1/4 inch. Stitch the folded edges in place, leaving a 4 centimeter or 1 1/2 inch opening to be able to thread the elastic through. Measure a length of elastic that sits comfortably around your arm. For dresses A and B of the Pansy pattern, measure along your forearm, and for dresses C and D, measure along your bicep. Cut 2 pieces of elastic at your preferred measurement. Then use a bodkin or a safety pin to help feed the lengths of elastic into the casings we just made on the sleeves. Once thread all the way through, stitch the 2 ends of elastic together with a zigzag stitch. And then stitch the opening of the casing closed. And you should now have a nicely gathered and elasticated sleeve like this. Now all that's left to do is hem the entire bottom edge of the skirt. And your adorable pansy dress is complete. You can optionally add a side zip to your pansy dress if you'd like a little bit of extra room when taking your dress on and off. Pin and stitch one side of a 20 centimeter or 8-inch invisible zip to the side edge of the dress back, with right sides together like this. Then pin the other side of the zip to the dress front, again with right sides together, and making sure the underarm and skirt seams match up nicely. Stitch the zip in place like this. Once stitched, do the zip up, and then pin the remaining side edges of the dress together. Stitch the dress along the sides, stopping where the invisible zip has just been stitched, like this. And you should now have a nicely hidden invisible zip at the side of your dress. Then simply finish off the pansy dress as per the instructions. So, how do these finished pansy dresses look? So I hope you enjoyed this step-by-step tutorial on how to make the pansy dress. And if you have purchased a copy of this pattern, whether it be the physical pattern or the digital pattern, thank you so much from the bottom of my heart. Your support really does mean the absolute world, and because of you I get to do what I love every single day, and for that I am just so grateful. If you've had a go at making a pansy dress for yourself, then I would love to see it, so be sure to tag me at Rosery Apparel when you share your photos on Instagram, and make sure you use the hashtag Rosery Apparel as well so I can see them. Thank you so much again for all of your support, and I'm so excited to see your own pansy dresses. Have a lovely day and thanks for watching.